The rain over Zurich in the autumn of 1916 was the color of old pewter. It slid down the leaded windows of the Bergallsy Clinic and pooled in the gutters like liquid mercury. Inside, in a narrow office lit by a single green-shaded lamp, Dr. Carl Gustav Jung closed the last of his private case files and pressed his palms to his eyes until sparks danced behind the lids. The clock on the mantel struck 2. He had not slept in 36 hours. What he had just written was not for publication. It would never appear in the Psychologist Type-In or the collected works. It was a confession, a warning, and a prophecy rolled into one. He titled the page, in a hand that trembled only slightly, Die Auserwählten des Schmerzes, The Chosen of Pain. Then he began to write the story that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Her name was Elizabeth. She arrived at the clinic on a Tuesday, soaked to the skin, clutching a paper parcel that turned out to contain nothing but a child's wooden horse painted the violent blue of a summer storm. She was 23, but her eyes looked 1,000 years old. Her hair hung in limp ropes, and her fingers worried at the parcel string, as if it were the last tether to something she had already lost. The admitting nurse noted that she flinched when touched, even gently, and that her pupils were wide despite the bright corridor lights. Jung met her in the small consulting room with the cracked plaster wall and the single window overlooking the rain-slicked courtyard. He offered tea. She refused. She sat on the edge of the chair as though ready to bolt. Jung's first note read, Patient reports synesthetic perception of emotions as color. Betrayal equals sulfur yellow. Grief equals bruise purple. Fear equals metallic gray. He underlined metallic gray 3 times. Elizabeth had been sent by her village priest after she began screaming in church. Not from piety, but because she claimed to see the priest's lust as a writhing red ribbon crawling over the altar. The villagers called her verhext. Her mother called her kaput. Jung called her main erster Riss, my first crack. In their 3rd session, she told him about the night her father locked her in the coal cellar for forgetting to latch the henhouse. She was 7. The darkness had been absolute, but she had seen things anyway. The slow drip of her mother's unspoken rage, the sour green of her father's guilt, the black oil slick of his desire to be rid of her. When they let her out 3 days later, she could no longer look at either parent without tasting ash. She described the taste precisely, bitter, metallic, like blood from a bitten tongue. She said the colors had started then, leaking from people the way heat leaks from a stove. She could not turn them off. She had tried. She had pressed her palms to her eyes until they bruised. The colors only grew brighter. Jung listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked only one question. Do the colors ever lie? She blinked. No, people do. That was the moment he understood. The wound had not broken her. It had opened her. The cellar had been the chisel. The darkness had been the forge. What emerged was not a victim, but a perceiver whose instrument had been tuned by terror. His name was Friedrich. He came 6 years later, in 1922, wearing the stiff collar of a bank clerk and the expression of a man who had misplaced a soul. He carried a leather notebook filled with columns, names, dates, micro-expressions, probable deceptions. The pages were dense, the handwriting precise, the margins crowded with arrows and asterisks. He'd been fired from 3 positions in 18 months for accusing superiors of fraud. He was always right. No one thanked him. They called him paranoid. They called him disruptive. They called him unemployable. Jung's diagnostic impression: obsessive pattern recognition secondary to early betrayal. Friedrich's betrayal had a name: Uncle Matthias, who had raised him after his parents died in the flu of 1918, then embezzled the inheritance and vanished to Argentina. Friedrich had been 12. He remembered the exact moment he knew. The way Matthias's left eyelid twitched when he said, "Everything is taken care of, my boy." The twitch became his Rosetta Stone. He could recreate on command a tiny flutter of muscle that betrayed more than words ever could. He could spot it across a crowded tram. He could smell fear sweat at 20 paces. He told Jung, "I don't see anymore, but I can't unsee." Jung asked, "What would happen if you tried?" Friedrich's answer was immediate. "I'd die, or someone else would." Jung wrote in the margin, "The gift is also the cage." He underlined it twice. He thought of Elizabeth's colors, of the way perception becomes prison when the world refuses to acknowledge what is seen. By 1930, the clinic had changed. The war had come and gone, leaving behind a generation of men with phantom limbs and women with phantom husbands. The corridors smelled of carbolic and despair. Among the new admissions was a boy named Lucas, age 9, who had stopped speaking after his village was shelled. He communicated by drawing charcoal storms, red rivers, faces with no mouths. His hands were always smudged, his eyes always elsewhere. Jung took him to the lake one afternoon. They sat on the pier while gulls wheeled overhead, and the water slapped the pilings with a sound like distant applause. Lucas drew the water, black, then suddenly shot through with silver threads. He pushed the paper toward Jung and tapped the silver. Hope. Jung guessed. Lucas shook his head. He tapped again, harder. Jung understood. Connection. The boy had felt it. Between himself and the doctor, between the living and the dead screaming under the surface of the lake. The silence was not absence. It was bandwidth, a frequency too high for ordinary ears. That night, Jung dreamed of a cracked vessel leaking light. He woke with the phrase vas bene clausum on his lips, the well-sealed vessel, and crossed it out. The vessel was not sealed. It was shattered on purpose. The light was not escaping. It was entering. By 1933, Jung had 37 such cases, not the schizophrenics or the melancholics. Those were tragedies of chemistry. These were something else. A taxonomy of the Gewalten, the chosen. He kept their files in a locked drawer, the key on a chain around his neck. He listed the commonalities in a notebook with a black cover. Early, shattering trauma, abandonment, abuse, catastrophic loss. Heightened perceptual acuity post-trauma, emotional synesthesia, lie detection, precognitive empathy. Social exile labeled too sensitive, difficult, mad. Recurrent individuation crises, depression, somatization, suicidal ideation when resisting the call. Spontaneous remission only after conscious integration of the wound. He underlined the last line twice and added, "The wound is a curriculum." He stared at the words until they blurred. He thought of Elizabeth tasting ash, Friedrich mapping twitches, Lucas drawing silver threads in black water. He thought of the way a tree split by lightning grows around the wound, the scar tissue stronger than the original wood. In December 1938, Jung locked himself in the tower at Bollingen with nothing but bread, wine, and the 37 files. Snow sealed the valley. The lake froze solid. For 7 nights, he did not sleep. He painted mandalas on the stone floor with charcoal and spit. He wrote in the red book until his hand cramped. He argued with phantoms who wore the faces of his patients. On the 7th night, he opened the red book to a fresh page and began the story he would never publish. He wrote it as myth, because only myth could hold the voltage. In the beginning, the gods needed scouts for the underworld. But the underworld was not a place. It was the unlit basement of the human soul. Volunteers were useless. They turned back at the first shadow. So the gods chose another way. They selected children with the strongest light, souls bright enough to survive being dropped into darkness. They broke them open like geodes. The cracks were precise, surgical. Through those cracks the light poured both ways, out to illuminate the abyss, and to blind the child forever to ordinary daylight. The broken ones were given 3 gifts and 3 curses. Gifts: sight beyond sight, to read the color of a lie before it left the tongue. Memory of the dark, to recognize the scent of predation in a smile. Capacity to hold contradictions, to love the monster and still name it. Curses: exile, no tribe would keep a lantern that showed their own shadows. Hunger, the light burned calories of soul. They were always starving. The choice, to integrate the darkness or become it. Most chose poorly. They sealed the cracks with gold leaf normalcy and called it healing. The light leaked out as depression, addiction, rage. A few, a terrifying few, chose integration. They became the lantern bearers. They did not heal the world. They lit it, one unbearable truth at a time. And the gods watched, silent, because the evolution of consciousness is not gentle. It is alchemy performed on living flesh. Jung emerged from the tower on Christmas morning 1938. His beard was iced, his eyes were clear. He burned the original files in the stove. The ashes rose like gray snow. The myth he kept. He folded it into a tin box and buried it in the garden under the stone that would later bear the inscription, Vocatus ac non vocatus Deus aderit. Called or not, the God will be present. He never spoke of the chosen again in public. But in 1944, when a young analyst named Marie-Louise von Franz asked why he kept a cracked teacup on his desk, he answered, because it still holds tea, and because the crack is where the light gets in. The story did not end with Jung's death. It migrated. In 1962, a social worker in Detroit named Clara read a bootleg translation of the Red Book myth and recognized herself. She had been raped at 14, institutionalized at 16, labeled borderline at 20. The myth arrived in a manila envelope with no return address. She read it by flashlight in the group home bathroom, so the night staff wouldn't see her crying. She began keeping a notebook like Friedrich's, but instead of lies, she tracked micro-recoveries. The moment a foster child's shoulders dropped when they realized an adult saw them without flinching. She founded the first trauma-informed group home in Michigan. The children called her Miss Light Leak. They left drawings under her door, cracked cups spilling stars. In 1987, a software engineer in Bangalore named Arjun found a myth on a floppy disk labeled Jung Unredacted. He had survived caste violence that left his sister dead and his faith in humanity in ashes. The disc came from a colleague who vanished the next week. Rumors said deported, rumors said disappeared. Arjun read the myth in one sitting, then wrote an algorithm that detected emotional predators in online grooming chats. It analyzed language patterns, timing, emoji use, the microscopic hesitations that betray intent. It saved 4,312 children in its first year. He never took credit. He signed his code Lantern Bearer V.1. He kept the floppy disk in a steel box under his bed. In 2019, a non-binary poet in Reykjavik named Soli tattooed the cracked vessel on their forearm. They had been outed by family, homeless by 17, suicidal by 19. The tattoo artist was a former priest who had left the church after too many confessions he couldn't absolve. Soli began performing spoken word pieces that forced audiences to sit with their complicity in silence. The performances ended with the room in tears and the poet untouched, because the tears were not for them. They were for the light finally seen. Soli's arms became a map of cracks, each one a story they had survived. On November 4th, 2025, in a converted warehouse in Berlin, 37 people gathered. They had never met, but they knew one another by the quality of their attention. Claire was 78, spine bent but eyes electric. Arjun's hair had gone silver. He carried a laptop like a shield. Soli wore the cracked vessel tattoo like armor. Others arrived from Lagos, Sao Paulo, Kyoto, each carrying a wound that had become a lens. They brought objects: a child's wooden horse painted blue, a leather notebook filled with columns, a charcoal drawing of silver threads in black water. They laid them on a table like offerings. They did not speak of healing. They spoke of integration. Clara told the story of the boy who drew her face the day she first believed she was safe. The drawing was crude, but the eyes were exact. She kept it in her wallet for 50 years. Arjun demonstrated the new version of Lantern Bearer, now an open-source global network running on blockchain, unkillable, unstoppable. Soli read a poem that began, "I was not broken. I was the break where the light decided to become visible." The poem ended with the sound of 37 people breathing in unison. At midnight, they lit 37 candles in cracked cups. The flames did not flicker. The light poured steady, surgical, unbearable. It lit the objects on the table, the faces around it, the shadows that followed each of them across continents and decades. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The light was a language. Outside, the city slept under ordinary street lamps. Inside, the chosen pain kept watch. If you are reading this, the myth has found you. The crack in your life is not random. The universe does not wound for sport. It wounds for range of motion. So the soul can stretch to hold what the unbroken cannot. The betrayal that taught you to read micro-expressions. The abandonment that taught you boundaries. The grief that taught you to recognize it in a stranger's eyes before they speak. These are not curses. They are calibrations. You were not chosen to suffer. You were chosen to perceive. The cost is exile. The compensation is accuracy. You will see the lie before it forms. You will smell the predator before it smiles. You will feel the earthquake in the room before the first crack appears in the wall. Your depression is not a disorder. It is the psyche's refusal to lie about what it has seen. Your anxiety is not weakness. It is the early warning system of a species learning to navigate its own shadow. Your isolation is not failure. It is the incubation period before the tribe of lantern bearers finds you. You do not need to heal until you are normal. You need to integrate until you are dangerously whole. Normal is a filtered feed. Whole is high definition and censored 360 degrees. Take the betrayal and make it a lie detector. Take the abandonment and make it a boundary. Take the grief and make it a bridge. Take the rage and make it a scalpel. The transformation is not gentle. It will ask you to sit in the dark you most fear and thank it for the education. It will demand you love the monster without becoming it. It will require you to forgive, not for their sake, but so the light can move through you unblocked. Forgiveness is not absolution. It is unclogging the pipe. You will fail. You will try to seal the cracks with alcohol, sex, success, spirituality, sarcasm, Netflix, activism, cynicism, self-help books, yoga retreats, ayahuasca, antidepressants, rage posting, ghosting, people-pleasing. Each failure is tuition. Pay it. The universe keeps meticulous receipts. When you are ready, the others will appear. You will recognize them by the way they do not flinch when you tell the truth. You will recognize them by the way they hold space for your darkness without trying to fix it. You will recognize them by the way they laugh at jokes that would make normal people call HR. You will build small fires and crack cups. You will keep the consciousness alive until the collective is strong enough to carry it without burning. This is not a metaphor. This is a job description. The universe is hiring. The wound was the interview. The choice is the contract. Sign it with your life. Use blood if necessary. The ink of the soul is hemoglobin. Years after Jung's death, a groundskeeper at Bollingen found a stone with the cracked vessel inscription half buried under ivy. The ivy had grown through the crack, splitting the stone further. Beneath it was a tin box, rusted but intact. Inside, a single page in Jung's handwriting, dated the day he died. The paper was thin, almost translucent. The ink faded to sepia. It read, asterisk to the next lantern bearer, who finds this. The light is not yours to hoard. It is yours to leak. Leak strategically. Leak until the world learns to see in the dark. Leak until the cracks are no longer wounds, but windows. Leak until the broken become the builders of a consciousness wide enough for gods and monsters both. You are not the exception. You are the experiment that worked. Carry the fire. The night is long, but the dawn is already inside you. Asterisk. The groundskeeper was 23. His name was Lucas, the boy who once drew silences. He had grown into a quiet man who tended gardens and listened to the lake. He read the note, folded it into his pocket, and went to find the others. He did not know their names yet, but he knew their frequency. He could feel it in the way the wind moved through the cracked stone. The story continues. The cracks keep letting the light through, and somewhere in a room you have not yet entered, another child is being broken open on purpose. The universe is still choosing. It always will be. The question is no longer why me. The question is what now? The lantern is in your hand. The crack is the wick. The darkness is the fuel. Burn.